Brother Holland has been most kind to every one of us as speakers, and doubly so has he been kind to me, and I appreciate the very charitable introduction that he gave tonight. I want to tell you how much I have enjoyed and how deeply honored I have been to have been a part of this great lectureship. If I know anything about what constitutes a good and great lectureship, I believe this one measures up marvelously and majestically well in every vital department. It has been an honor to be here, and I certainly have learned a great deal. I have appreciated every speaker that I've had the opportunity of hearing, and I just believe that every one of us can go away from this lectureship feeling, Lord, it has been good for us to be here. I have appreciated the tone and tenor of this lectureship. I have appreciated the fact that it is a book, chapter, and verse lectureship. I have appreciated the fact that there have not been uncertain sounds. I have appreciated the fact that the day of the proof text is not lost here at Williams Road, here in your fine school of preaching, and in this, the beginning of your annual fall or autumn lectureship. I feel that every one of us who has come as speaker, as visitor, owes a great deal to the Williams Road congregation, to your fine elders, to Brother Holland, Brother Goldman, and others who have made possible this great lectureship. I've appreciated those who have shared with us the bread of life, and you gracious ladies who have fed us with those marvelous meals every day at lunch. But tonight, our study deals with humanism. And Brother David has certainly not overdrawn, nor has he exaggerated the nature, the enormous challenge that we face from the world of humanism. Not too long ago, I was engaged in a gospel meeting with a small rural congregation located in West Tennessee, not many miles from where I live. And on one particular night, I spoke in regard to an Old Testament question that is repeated again in the New Testament. The question from the psalmist, what is man, repeated again, that's found in Psalm 8 and 4, repeated again in Hebrews, the 2nd chapter and verse 6. In talking about the nature of man, I spent about half the time in talking about some of the misconceptions of man. I talked about the Epicurean view of man, the Sadducean view of man, the Calvinistic view of man, the evolutionary view of man, and I spent a little bit of time in talking about the humanistic view of man, or humanism as it affects man. A young man led the singing for me in that gospel meeting. He's about 17 or 18 years of age, just having graduated from high school this past spring. After the service, he came up to me with a quotation, "Man is the measure of everything." I had not mentioned that in connection with humanism. He said, "I came across that statement just the other day in some of my reading." That is not an isolated example, may I assure you. Humanism has been around for a long time, but it certainly has been infamously successful in getting down to the very grassroots of where we as individuals live. And our schools are certainly filled with it. Our religious bodies are filled with it. Our religious neighbors are fed constantly upon a diet that has been influenced by the thinkers that belong to the realm of humanism. I believe that it is truly one of the great forces that we face in the society in which we live today. In introducing the study of humanism, I believe that humanism falls into that department of words that are often used and many times incorrectly. Not too long before his death, or at least sometime during the 15 years in which he served as the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, the late Pope Paul VI referred to Roman Catholicism as being, quote, Christian humanism, unquote. I do not believe that the Pope would have joined these two terms if he had recognized what Christianity is, or if he had recognized what humanism is all about. Every one of us will be in agreement that Roman Catholicism is not Christianity, But the concept of joining Christian, the word Christian, and the term humanism together certainly brings together terms that are incompatible. To me, it makes no more sense to join humanism with Christianity than it does to talk about Christian atheism, or to talk about faithful infidelity, or to talk about unity in diversity, or to speak of those who are unimmersed Christians. They're just some terms that do not have any affinity with each other. They do not have any kinship toward each other. And Christianity and humanism, or the Bible and humanism, certainly would be among that number. I'm aware of the fact that some people use the word humanism simply to refer to the fact that they're interested in human beings being happy, and human beings having a just and a serene type of environment in which to live. Some use the word humanism to refer to the fact that they are concerned about human problems and human heartaches. But may I suggest that it is an improper use of the word humanism to use it in that fashion, because that is not the way the writers and the thinkers in this field use the term, as I'm going to detail in our lesson tonight. As we present the lesson and think together, I divide the lesson into the following areas of consideration. Number one, I want to talk about humanism defined and depicted. Number two, I want to suggest something about the history of humanism. It is not a new movement. It has been upon the human scene for many, many centuries. I want to talk about the Humanist Manifesto of 1933, and then the second edition of it, the Humanist Manifesto of 1973, 40 years later. I want to talk to you about some of the fruits that have come from humanism, and then last of all, I want to show you how that it is truly the case of the Bible versus humanism. Now, in regard to humanism, its definition and its depiction. The statement that I referred to a moment or two ago, man is the measure of everything, the supreme measure of everything, is certainly a good way to define the term that we are contemplating tonight. I believe that that is the main proposition of humanism. I believe that this proposition rests basically upon three foundational thoughts. Number one, humanism rests upon the concept of a rejection of that which is supernatural, of a rejection of religious authority. Number two, it suggests that the main goal, the supreme purpose for the human being is the human welfare of man. That is the supreme goal of this system. And number three, it looks upon science as being the panacea, as being the prescription, as being the solution to any and every problem that is faced by mankind. Now, I recognize that there are people who are involved in what they call scientific humanism, or maybe religious humanism, or maybe atheistic humanism, or Marxist humanism, or the Renaissance humanism, or sexual humanism, but every one of these is propped up by these three foundational elements: a rejection of the supernatural and of religious authority, that man and his welfare is the supreme goal set before every one of us, and science, not a savior at God's right hand, is the one that we ought to be looking toward for the salvation of every human malady, of every human problem. I believe that Brother Wayne Jackson suggested it so well in one of his recently written articles in his courageous paper, The Christian Courier, when he referred to and analyzed an interview that had recently been made with Madeleine O'Hare, the infamous atheist from Austin, Texas. But anyway, this woman who had been so responsible in times gone by from eliminating prayer from the climate of the schoolroom was recently asked what else she would like to eliminate. And in language that was filled with a very kind of thing that she's famous for and depleting that part of it, she suggested I would like to see every church in America closed down, and I would like to see each one of the buildings become something like a home for the aged or an outpatient clinic. In analyzing that statement, Brother Jackson raises the question, has anybody ever heard of any homes of the aged that have been provided by Madeleine O'Hare? He confessed that he had not, and neither have I. And may I suggest in regard to the turning out of the church buildings, their worshipers, and filling them with either aged people or with those who are sick or infirm, she belongs to a movement that would practically rid the world of either one of these. She belongs to a movement that would kill the older people. Euthanasia will take care of that. And then it's only one small step from that philosophy until the acceptation of the old Spartan philosophy of only allowing the strong and the well-being to live and killing off the sick, the infirm, the diseased, the ill. And if that be done, then there would be no need for either a home for the aged or any kind of outpatient clinic. That is precisely and exactly where humanism will take any person that accepts the premises upon which it is built. But there is another concept to this statement of humanism that I want us to note tonight, and that is its history. It is not a new movement. It is one that had its beginning some 4 to 5 centuries before the birth of Christianity upon the earth. It began among the Greek philosophers who styled themselves the Sophists. And in particular, there was a man, Protagoras, who lived between the years of 485 BC and 415 BC, who taught that man is the measure of everything. And he also taught that contradictory assertions are both true. Now, he taught that nearly 25 centuries ago, and it is still a dominant philosophy that is accepted by multitudes of people today. No one reads much in the fields of philosophy today without recognizing that many people accept the thought that even though two statements may be absolutely contradictory of each other, that both of them can nevertheless be the truth about the matter. Have you ever wondered why so many of our religious neighbors can say in regard to Preacher A, who teaches that salvation is by faith alone, and Preacher B, who denies that salvation is by faith alone, and the average person will say both Preacher A and Preacher B are both men of God. They are both setting forth the will of Jehovah God. Have you ever wondered why people in the religious realm can say in regard to Preacher C, who declares that there is only one person in the Godhead, and Preacher D, who declares that there are 3 persons in the Godhead, and the average religionist can listen to both of them and can declare, sincerely so to speak, that both of these men are great and good men of God. They are both setting forth the will of Almighty God. Have you ever wondered why the average religionist can listen to another preacher who denies the existence of the biblical final things, such as the second coming of Christ, the resurrection from the dead, the final judgment, and a place called heaven or hell? And another preacher can come along and contend that there's reality in all of these, and people who listen to both of them will conclude that they are both right, even though they have set forth contradictory statements, contradictory beliefs. It is simply a case of humanism at work in the realm of religion, and it works in every layer of society. But humanism did not die with the Grecian people who introduced it to the world some 4 to 5 centuries before the birth of Christ. This movement continued in force, and it seems to me that a second great wave of humanism was reserved for about the time that the religious historian refers to as the Renaissance movement. taking place in Europe and the countries thereof some 1400 years after the birth of our Savior. And it was a general period in which many people had begun to say we need to revive the Greek classics. We need to stop emphasizing the great influence of the church, and especially so much influence dealing with the soul and the other world. And we need to begin to place our emphasis upon this world, upon man as he lives right now. And hence we have the second great wave of humanism very much in effect. It seems to me, in the study that I have sought to do in regard to humanism, that there has been a third great wave that has contributed greatly to the spread of humanism, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries. These have been the 2 centuries in particular in which, especially since 1859, when Origin of Species was published by Charles Darwin, that there has been a general acceptation of evolution as being a proven fact of science. There has been a growing secularism among the various peoples of the world, beginning with German rationalism in the 19th century and continuing on with the work of the destructive critics, the modernists and the liberals on into the 20th century. We have had increasing attacks made about the Bible, the God of the Bible, the Christ of the Bible, and especially such fundamentals as the inspiration of the Bible, the infallibility of the Bible, its inerrancy, whether the Bible is authoritative, whether it is free from error, as inerrancy suggests that it is, and whether it is an all-sufficient book. The battle for the Bible continues, and it grows warmer and hotter all of the time. A denominational preacher has recently written a book that I read not too long ago, The Battle for the Bible. And he produces documentation after documentation from a number of leading denominational scholars in our day, where they no longer accept an infallible and an inerrant book. And all of these have simply contributed together to increase humanism at work within the human family. We are now living in a time in which the Bible is out and humanistic philosophy is in. We're living in a time in which the Godhead is out and man in the driver's seat and upon the throne of authority is now in. We are living in a time in which the church is out and humanistic institutions are in. We're living in a time in which salvation is old hat to people, and now man is interested in that which will help advance his social development and help him to find a better life. We're living in a time in which redemption has been rejected, and the social gospel has been eminently influenced by the work of humanistic thinkers. I think anybody that has ever done any real study in the social gospel that is concerned with man in the here and now and not concerned with man in the there and then is aware of the fact that humanism has certainly contributed much to the development of the social gospel. We're living in a time in which the Bible doctrine of final things is out. And the humanists and their thinkers tell us that this life is all there is. There isn't any other life beyond this one. We're living in a time in which evolution by purely natural means is in, and creation by the hand of an omnipotent God is out. This is basically the history of the humanistic movement. I believe that 1933 and 1973, years in which some of us have lived, and of course the last one, a year in which most of us were alive at that time, are 2 important years in the development of humanism in our country. In 1933, there were a number of educators in our country, liberal theologians, as well as the philosophers who got together and signed a document that contained a number of very strategic points as far as humanism is concerned. They gave it the name the Humanist Manifesto number 1. Among the signers in 1933 was the socialist John Dewey. If that name is not familiar to you, you can be assured of the fact that you have grown up in an educational environment in our nation in which Dewey has perhaps influenced American education as no one American has ever done so. I have a graduate degree in education from George Peabody College in Nashville, and it has long been recognized as a prestigious school in the field of education. And course after course in my pursuance of that degree led me into contact with the influence of John Dewey. I believe that he has done more to wreck public education in the United States in this, the 20th century, than any one other person with which I am acquainted. That may not be your appraisal of his influence, but it is nevertheless my appraisal of his influence. And when he signed the Humanist Manifesto number 1, he and his colleagues were simply setting forth their basic beliefs about making man into his own God. Some of the points that they stressed in this first manifesto were the following: that matter is eternal, and if that be the case, then creation, as set forth in Genesis 1:1, is ruled out. That sounds just like something that Professor Flew from Reading University would sign and be glad to attach his signature to. It would be a statement that Professor Madsen, who debated Brother Warren last fall, just about a year ago, in Tampa, Florida, on the existence of God, would certainly be glad to sign his signature to. The eternality of matter. That is absolutely basic to any kind of contention that evolution and atheism must make. Number 2, they suggested that man is here as a result of evolution by purely physical means or natural means, and that rules out the entire concept of man's being made by deity, by a powerful God. Number 3, they suggested that man is wholly material. The Sadducees in the day of our Lord would have been glad to have joined this group and assigned their names to this particular concept, because that was the very basis on which they approached life and its problems. The Bible teaches us that they denied the resurrection. They denied the reality of the angelic realm. They suggested that there is no other life. They were the materialists. They were the modernists, the liberals. They were the humanists of their day, as touching man's basic nature, that he is simply physical, that there is nothing in him and of him that outlives his body at death. Hence, they would view all the emphasis that we have given upon the soul and the spirit as being worse than a waste of time. In fact, they suggested in that first Humanist Manifesto that such acts as worship, prayer, Bible study, and the like were a waste of time and kept people from doing that which will really promote human welfare. These people are antagonistic to everything that you and I hold dear as sons and daughters of the living God. They would suggest that every mile that we have traveled in coming to a lectureship like this, every hour that has been spent in the preparation of speeches, and every hour that has been spent by any of us in listening to the same has all been nothing but a waste of time. That we would have better spent our time had we stayed home and worked with some of the social problems in our respective neighborhoods or respective areas where we live. They suggested in regard to the signing of this first Humanist Manifesto that all religious institutions have, or rather need to be changed. And of course that would be inclusive of the Lord's church. Now, if you want to know where they want to make the changes, the directions in which they'd like to go, listen to the statement again of Madeleine O'Hare, who would destroy every church in America and close every building to any kind of future worshiper and simply turn it into a home for aged people. That is what humanism is interested in doing. They suggest that man need not expect any aid from a source outside himself. He is the main one in the universe, and he is the only one that is ever going to help him in the quest of his dreams. It sounds just like Teller did when he came to Searcy, Arkansas in 1946 or 1947 and debated Brother Bales and made fun of Arkansas people in the South, or anybody who still believed that there was a ghost in the sky that was going to help them. Teller took the position as the atheist and the humanist that he was, that man is his own helper, that he is his only helper, and that is humanism. They suggest, furthermore, that all institutions have evolved, and this would include all religious institutions as well. They are here as a result of social evolution. And that just simply means that there has not been any kind of guiding hand from deity in the establishment and the continuation of any religious body upon the face of the earth. We grant that to be true in regard to every humanly found religious organization. We deny unequivocally and unquestionably in regard to the Lord's work in the establishment of his cause upon the earth. Now, perhaps when this movement was begun, or at least when this manifesto was signed in 1933, perhaps it did not make the splash in the world at large that the one did in 1973. But the world had become more secular by 1973. Religion was less and less a force in the minds and hearts of many people 40 years later. And so we want to take a look at what they wrote 40 years later. And the 40 years that separated the writing of Manifesto number 1 from Manifesto number 2, we had passed through the remainder of the Depression years. From 1939 to 1945, the world was engaged and engulfed in a bath, or rather almost a universal bath of the shedding of blood, World War II, that took something like 30 million lives and did untold damage to human relationships, human lives that were preserved, and of course billions and billions of dollars worth of property damage. Then we had the Cold War years, followed by the Korean conflict, followed by the South Vietnam conflict. And of course, during the 60s, we had the violent occurrences of disorder and disrespect for any kind of law and order in our country. It just seems as though the humanist thinkers would have had the thought dawn upon their mind that man in the driver's seat really hasn't done such a great job in forging a better world in which men and women might live. And yet, that did not daunt their faith in the least as far as their adherence and allegiance to humanism was concerned. Again, liberal theologians and infidel philosophers and educators who respected neither the God of heaven nor the dignity of man on earth signed Humanism Manifesto number 2. And they took the same basic skeptical stance toward the fundamentals of the faith that their predecessors had taken 40 years before. But they went a little bit more into detail in regard to some of these things. They not only suggested that people who engaged in a belief in God and a worship of his person and an honoring of his cause not only are engaged in something that is not profitable, they went so far as to suggest that people who are so engaged are engaged in that which is harmful, that which is injurious, and that which certainly ought to be eliminated. Again, they called attention to the fact that man is here as a result of evolution, that the world has always been here. Again, they called attention to the fact that man is strictly a physical being, that there is no such thing as a ghost in the machine, as they chose to refer to the soul. They denied that there can be such a thing as a soul separate from the body, and again emphasizing that man is just like an animal of the field, that he is just like Rover the dog. When he is dead all over. And hence we have these 2 years and the signing of these 2 manifestos in which humanism has let the world know exactly what their guidelines are, what their designs are for the future, and what they expect to do in molding the world in which you and I will live out the remainder of our days, and our children and grandchildren will live the remainder of their days. Mention was made this afternoon that we are upon the threshold of hard times indeed. And I believe Brother Jackson spoke correctly in making that prediction. There are so many forces at work that would destroy everything that you and I hold dear. But what have been some of the fruits of humanism at work? Well, we see what it did with the Grecian mind. See what it led to when Paul faced humanism in Acts the 17th chapter. The Epicurean people and the Stoic people had been influenced by generation after generation of Grecian philosophers who had made man into the supreme object of all worth, of all consideration. And perhaps there never was a place that Paul preached where the results were any less than any of his missionary journeys, unless it be at Athens. Hence, we never read about a first and a second Athenian epistle, such as we do 1st and 2nd Corinthians. We never read about his return there again, though he might have. Mention is made that he went to Macedonia again, or rather Greece again, where Athens was located. But Paul met one of his great Waterloos, spiritually speaking, among the very people that had been so greatly saturated with humanism, Athens of Greece. And then again, we see something about the work of humanism and the Renaissance movement and that which followed, as there was a de-emphasis upon that which is religious and a greater and greater emphasis upon the secularization of man. But I believe that in the 19th and the 20th centuries, we have really seen what humanism is capable of producing. In the realm of politics and economics, it has been able to produce Marxist humanism. Karl Marx was basically a humanist, atheistic and filled with humanism. So was Engels, who helped provide the finances that permitted Marx to do the writing that was to develop into the coming of communism. There was a time, and it wasn't more than probably 70 or 75 years ago, maybe not quite that many, when all the known communists in the world could have easily been placed in a building this size. And yet look at where they have gone and where they have grown to in just this century. And in the realm of biological origins, as touching where we came from, humanism produces evolution. In the realm of morality, it produces the Playboy philosophy. Situation ethics are the new morality. In religion, it produces liberalism and ultimately atheism. And on, the fruits continue to come from a movement that is molding so much of the world in which we live. But last of all tonight, I want to deal to some extent with the Bible versus humanism. Humanism is an affirmation of the eternality or the eternal nature of matter. That destroys, or at least would destroy if it were so, the basic declaration with which Holy Writ opens, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." There is absolutely no way that one can hang on to humanism, which contends for the eternal nature of matter, and hang on to Genesis 1:1 that teaches that matter is not eternal in its nature. And may I suggest in regard to Genesis 1 that it is time for every one of us, if we've been so prone in times gone by, to quit apologizing for Genesis 1. That chapter does not need to be rewritten by those who reject it. It needs to be accepted as Moses, the great penman of the Pentateuch, penned it about 35 centuries ago. I make no apology for being a full, a firm believer in every statement that is made in Genesis 1. I believe it is factual from its opening declaration until God looked upon all that he made and pronounced it to be good at the end of day number 6. May I suggest to you that humanism that contends that man is here as a result of evolution by natural means is a rejection of every creation account that we have of man in the Bible. It is a rejection of Genesis 1:26-27, how that God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. It is a rejection of Genesis 2:7, how that the Lord made man from the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. It is an utter rejection of that bright and blessed and beautiful account of woman's being made, Genesis 2:21-23, how that God caused the deep sleep to descend upon Adam, how that he opened his side, removed a rib with its flesh, and then formed, fashioned, or builded the woman and placed her by the side of man. Humanism does not believe that Adam and Eve came about as set forth in Genesis, the 2nd chapter. Solomon made the observation that the Lord has made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions, Ecclesiastes 12:29. The psalmist suggested that it is the Lord who has made us and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture, Psalm 100 and verse 3. The writer David suggested that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. A little bit incidental to the point that I'm making, but it never ceases to amaze me to read in some of the polluted Bibles how they have injected Calvinism into Psalm 51:5, how that David was conceived in sin and born a sinner. And yet by the time that some of these fellows in their translation of word get over to Psalm 139:14, they have David's declaring, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. If they're right in suggesting that David was conceived as a sinner and born as a sinner, is he thanking the Lord that he was fearfully conceived in sin and wonderfully born as a transgressor of God's will? I believe that needs an answer from some of these fellows who evidently have not thought about the contradiction they have injected into these great passages. But again, the Bible teaches from the lips of our own Savior. Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? There isn't a humanist on earth that believes the Lord told the truth when he made that declaration to an audience in Matthew 19:4-5. And he makes it even clearer, perhaps, that man goes back to the very beginning of creation in Mark 10:6. They not only reject the idea of creation, but they certainly do not believe that God had anything to do with man's being made. The Apostle Paul suggested upon Mars Hill that we are the offspring of God, Acts 17:28-29. The idea that man is a soulless creature is in conflict with statement after statement. Solomon said that the dust will return to the earth from whence it came, referring to the body, but the spirit will return to God its giver, Ecclesiastes 12:7. James says that physical death is separation of spirit from body. It is the body that dies, not the spirit. If what humanism contends for is so, then our Lord argued illogically and fallaciously when he used the argument in Luke the 20th chapter, 27 through 40, that the reason that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob still live at the time the burning bush incident occurred is because each one of them possessed a soul, something that outlived the body that was interred into the cave of Machpelah. There is nothing but helpless and hopeless conflict between the book that teaches that man does have a soul and the humanist movement that denies man a soul or a spirit. Humanism teaches that man is the center of everything, but the Bible teaches that the Godhead enjoys that particular position. In a beautiful statement in Isaiah 57:15, he is referred to as the High and Holy One, as the one who inhabits eternity, and is the one who is willing to dwell in the humble heart of one who is contrite and who feels the spirit of lowliness. The Bible tells us that God's ways are not our ways, neither are his thoughts our thoughts. As the heavens soar above the earth, so are his ways higher than our ways, and his thoughts than our thoughts. If humanism be true, Jeremiah told a falsehood when he said, "It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps," Jeremiah 10:23. Humanism is in hopeless conflict with the concept that man's life is right now and doesn't extend beyond death. The Bible teaches that it does. Humanism teaches that there is no other world than this one. The Bible teaches that Jesus Christ is going to come again. Humanism says not so. The New Testament teaches it in about 1 out of every 25 verses. And since there are about, almost 8,000 verses in the New Testament, that means in excess of 300 verses depict his second coming. The Bible teaches that he's going to raise the dead. Humanism says not so. The Bible teaches that after death there is going to be judgment. Hebrews 9:27. Humanism says not so. The Bible teaches that there are the two eternal destinies, eternal Gehenna and eternal heaven, the home of the soul. Humanism says not so. There can never be any kind of harmony, any kind of compatibility between the Bible on the one hand and humanism on the other hand. No Christian ought ever to be guilty of referring to himself as a Christian humanist. He should know, that is, all of us should know, what humanism is and spend our life in exposing it and opposing it wherever it be found.